Thanks very much. Welcome to all 109 of you who are on screen so far, and I'm sure we'll have other people pop in to our webinar, Maiden Man, Built Heritage and a Sustainable Future. It's really good to see so many of you online for this 12th and final Saturday webinar in the Tri-Biosphere webinar series being held between our Biosphere, Dublin Bay Biosphere and Kerry Biosphere to mark the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Programme. Before I introduce today's speakers and topic, I'd first like to invite, first of all, Dean Eaton from Dublin Bay Biosphere, our very near neighbours, and then Eleanor Turner from Kerry Biosphere, just to say a little bit about their biospheres. Over to you, Dean.
Thanks very much, Jo. So I've got an image behind me, and it's often talked about on our webinars. This is a seal, and seal in Irish is rowan, so it's rowan seal, which does exactly what it says on the tin. But for me, this image really captures our biospheres. You have nature, you have sustainable developments of businesses in the background that are operating in a sustainable and respectful manner. But we also have the cultural and historical heritage. So on the left-hand side there, you have St. Begnet's Church. It's believed to be on a site where an original church was found in the 6th or 7th century, a wooden church found in the 6th or 7th century. There's a stone there on that church that has a number dating to 1738. So it's interesting that we have the this historical interest. Also on Dorky Island there is a Martellum Tower, and it's the only Martellum Tower that we know of that doesn't have a front door. So during the time of the Napoleonic Wars, when these were built, the guys inside would have to be permanently manned, and they'd have to lower themselves down on a rope, which is really quite interesting. Now, some of our other historical buildings, we have Dorky Castle, which is now a heritage centre. It was originally a fortified house and church. Then we have the Sandy Cove Martellum Tower, which is a James Joyce museum. So really focusing on other cultural elements within the biosphere. Williamstown Martellum Tower is going to be put into some kind of community use, and its hope will help showcase elements of the biosphere. Just of another interest, we have a real interest at the moment in our air signs. So these are signs that were numbered with EIRE to signify where they were within the country, and to advise on visiting pilots during the Second World War that they were on course and they needed to keep going east if they were Americans bringing in supplies and so on and so forth, or if they were German, that they were probably off course. But I think that because they were numbered, that information would have been shared with the Allies. So although Ireland were neutral, there was an element of kind of cooperation there, which is really quite interesting. So there's a lot, that's happening within our biosphere that's connected to the culture and history. So I'm going to end that there, and I'm going to pass you on to Eleanor, who's going to tell you a little bit about the Kerry Biosphere.
Thanks, Dean. It's lovely to hear about the different aspects of the biosphere reserves, and I think there's such a lot encompassed within a biosphere reserve just through the natural and cultural heritage aspect of it. I think in Kerry here we are a mountain biosphere reserve, and we have a huge wealth of natural resources. We're really famous for the oak woodlands in Killarney, the red deer. We're the site of the reintroduction programme of the white-tailed eagle. But in amongst that, we have a huge wealth of built heritage as well, from cairns and field monuments, including standing stones and megalithic structures, through to stone circles. We have ecclesiastical foundations and Norman tower houses. We also have some of the largest state houses, for example, Muckross House, that's open to the public, and Killarney House, that's been renovated and is open to the public and serves as the information centre for Killarney National Park and kind of the gateway really to the Kerry Biosphere Reserve. And of course, then today we have our traditional Irish towns and villages, which some of my friends in the UK have always been amazed with, because they're all multicoloured, each house painted a different bright colour, which is really significant for the area and specific to Ireland, I think, as well, which adds a little bit to our cultural and the built heritage you find here. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the Isle of Man today and learning a little bit before I finally get to come and visit you, Jo. So I'll hand back to you, and thanks very much for setting up today's webinar.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Eleanor. Our webinars to date have largely been around our natural environment and our cultural heritage and practices, and it's been a really fascinating series. I really commend each and every one of them to you, and as discussed, you can watch them all again on Kerry and Dublin's YouTube, and hopefully the Isle of Man will have YouTube very shortly. But today we turn our attention to another important aspect of the UNESCO Biosphere. Excuse me, that's our built heritage. It's very easy to take the buildings around us for granted, but if you stop to look up occasionally, you see a diversity of architectural styles as rich and as varied as our natural assets. And I think all of our buildings tell a story. I often wish buildings could talk, actually. Our built heritage not only plays a key part in our economic success, it also contributes to that unique sense of place that's so important in our UNESCO Biosphere. Today, we're going to hear from three of those charged with the creation of and conservation of those buildings. Ross Brazier, who's the Principal Registered Buildings Officer with the Isle of Man Government, John Paul Walker, who's Historic Buildings Architect with Manx National Heritage, and he has the odd castle or two to look after, such as the one behind me. And finally, Martin Thomas, a RIBA Chartered Architect and co-founder of the practice Horncastle Thomas. They will weave together the story of the Isle of Man's built heritage, past, present and future. Please put your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. So without further ado, over to you, Ross. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. I'll just load my PowerPoint. So, as Jo said, my name is Ross Brazier. I'm the Principal Registered Buildings Officer. I work within the Planning and Building Control Division, and that sits within the department known as DEFA, that's the Department for Environment, Food and Agriculture. I've lived and worked on the island for 2 years, so I am in no way an expert on the island's architecture. There are many people on island that know far more than me, and my talk really is my interpretation and my understanding of the island's architecture and its historic built environment. You will have to excuse my Essex accent as I try to pronounce a few Manx words. I'm not a Manx speaker, so please forgive me for my pronunciations, but I'll try my best. Having grown up in England, in Essex, I do have also family connections to Ireland. And upon arriving on the island, I felt a familiarity of the historic built environment and the building stock from both places. So I'm hoping that, you know, some of the building types will seem quite familiar to our colleagues across the water in Ireland there. This building that we're looking at now was a pair of cottages. It's one building now. They sit on the shore in a place called Niarbor, which is on the island's west coast. And if they look familiar to you, they were actually filmed in the film Waking Ned. So if you've ever seen that film, you may recognize these buildings. Sorry, I shot there. The island's vernacular buildings are a product of their environment, with rubble stone walls covered with rough lime render or a lime wash finish. They have small windows to protect from the elements and contain the heat. Roofs were thatched, always made from locally sourced materials. The thatching was secured down with ropes fixed to rope stones called boids agains. You can see that slates were fixed into the chimney stacks to cast off water and give added protection from the elements. This is Bridge Cottage, located in the Len, in the parish of Andreas, to the north of the island. Again, a thatched cottage. You'll notice that the form is quite prominent in that the stacks are placed on the gable ends of the building. And these simple dwellings were often 2 rooms, a main room with a large fireplace known as a cholla, and a smaller room, which was often a bedroom. The location of these large fireplaces is usually indicated by looking at the positioning of the windows. They're usually slightly asymmetric, with one window being slightly further in, providing space for the large fireplace. And that's always something interesting to look out for. When resources or finances allowed, these buildings were extended with an additional floor. Unfortunately, we have no surviving two-storey thatched buildings left on the island, to my knowledge. If there are any around, please do let me know. Unfortunately, the thatching technique has been lost from the island. And although we don't have many thatched buildings, this is an essential skill that's necessary if we're to maintain our thatched buildings in an authentic manner. Where these buildings have survived, they are now roofed in slate or imitation slate. And this is an example of one such building, Balaf Farm in St John's in the parish of German. The island's built environment has definitely been influenced by the island's unique land division system. This is a matter for a talk in its own right, and by someone far more knowledgeable than me. However, the land is divided in a series of sizes of forms, starting with a sheading, then a parish, then a treen, then a quarterland, and then you had intact, which was small parcels of land and common land used for grazing. This picture shows the quarterland farmhouse called Upper Balacrink, which sits in the parish of Maloo. It's a classic example of a Manx quarterland farmhouse. Its 5-bay form, its central porch, strong gables facing the roads with a stack centrally located. And you may just be able to see the verge capping at the edge of the roof on the gable there. It also has a classic cat slides rear addition that provided extra rooms. Now, this building was actually drawn by the renowned arts and crafts designer Archibald Knox, and this is his drawing from the late 19th or early 20th century of Balacrink Farm. The building today, however, really shows how character and local distinctiveness can be erased via the loss of traditional materials and techniques. Its smooth, cementitious render, which is very squared, the UPVC windows, artificial slates, and the alterations to the chimney stacks and the central porch. It really shows that, the need for these traditional techniques, skills, and materials really do provide character to the buildings. Of course, many of the farms have associated agricultural buildings. This is Stilwood Farm in Lezayre, a classic example of farmyard buildings we have on the island. And here are some more at Ballador Farm in Arbury. So the building that you can see, the circular building to the front of the picture, is actually a surviving example of a horse walk. The only other one I'm aware of is located in the north of the island at Smeal Farm. It's important to remember, though, that we shouldn't be looking at these buildings in isolation. They are part of a landscape, peppered throughout, and provide real character and a sense of place. This is clearly shown here in the East Baldwin Valley. The buildings sometimes are ghosts, remnants of former homes that are now empty through the result of emigration or changes in land ownership and farming practices. On island, these empty ghost buildings are known as Fultons, and they're a valued part of the Manx landscape. Our vernacular buildings don't just exist in a rural setting, however, and we do have vernacular urban building types, particularly in the ancient towns of Peel and Castletown. Again, they are used from local resources like their rural counterparts, and they react to the landscape within which they sit. The steep pitched roof on some of the buildings is usually an indicator of their age. More older buildings tend to have a steeper pitched roof, and quite often these buildings are rendered. Local distinctiveness is also evident in the ecclesiastical architecture of the island. This is the old church in Balaf Parish. Its appearance now dates from the 18th century, although there was a much earlier building on the site, and the building has been rebuilt over time. The rounded porch, the pilasters and bell tower detail, they're restrained in their detail, but they have a simple elegance about them, which really is a less is more approach. This is also evident in the parish church at Santon. Again, it has an 18th century appearance, however, there is a much earlier building on site. Again, the detail is minimalist. It's a less is more approach, but there is a beauty in its simplicity and its small scale and form. The 19th century did bring neoclassicism to the island, and this is Castle Mona, constructed for the 4th Duke of Atholl in 1803 and designed by George Stewart. Its slender columns on the port cochere and in the pilaster detail on the seaward side. You can also see above the pilasters on the seaward facing side some codestone medallions. This is the only example on island of codestone that I'm aware of. There is a striking contrast to the earlier vernacular buildings with the use of the imported stone, and it's quite striking, and the slender finish just gives these buildings gives it a beautiful presence. There are other buildings that follow this neoclassical designs. This is Kentraw in Rushen Parish. This is one of the island's more grander homes. You'll see the portico there on the front is of an imported ashlar stone. It really gives a classical elegance to this building. But if you start looking at what's behind, you can see that there is a 5-bay house that has been remodeled. It's a classic example of the island's resourcefulness and an approach that's becoming more popular today now, and that's the reuse of buildings rather than demolishing and completely rebuild. So we have, you know, an older Manx farmhouse there that has been embellished with later additions and classical elements. The 19th century did also see the introduction of architectural details that previously hadn't been seen on the island. This is the old House of Keys, designed by Thomas Brine. It's introduced, you know, deep eaves detailing and central stacks. This is a new beginning of the introduction of these kind of more classical architectural details onto the island. During the 19th century, the island also began to have buildings designed in a Gothic revival style. This is the Nunnery in Douglas and King William's College just outside Castletown. The island seems to have developed its own unique, distinctive style in terms of Gothic revival, which you can see in the next slides. There is a focus on castellated parapets that project like they're ready to see siege. There is a military feel and almost a Spartan quality to them. They're devoid of the extravagance seen in other forms of Gothic revival. We're far away from the eminent Gothic revival architect Pugin here. There is a simplicity to them and a Spartanness which is quite stripped back. There has been a term used to describe these as Manx baronial. It's a term that the island's Victorian expert Peter Kelly disagrees with and doesn't like the term. And I completely agree with Peter. There isn't anything really baronial about it. It really is a stripped back Gothic with a military feel. But this style is used and peppered throughout the island. And for me, it has become a classic Manx version of Gothic revival. it's really hard not to overemphasize the impact that the tourist industry had on the island, which began in the 19th century. The use of the island as a holiday destination from England really changed the island's built environment dramatically. It's still evident in Douglas Bay, its former massing dominated by the sweeping line of former boarding houses that were once filled with tourists. For me though, this tourism heyday also survives on a micro scale, in smaller elements. When you walk around streets, the remnants of this holiday boom time during the 19th century can be seen in the small painted fanlight details, such as the ones shown on this slide, and the small details in cast iron railings attached to these boarding houses. For me, these are the tangible, although small details that retell the story of the island's tourism boom and provide local distinctiveness, character, and history to the island. During the late 19th and early 20th century, the arts and crafts movement made its presence on the island, and the island's probably most renowned architect, Baillie Scott, was designing buildings at this time. Although he wasn't from the island, he set up his practice here, and this is his building that is called the Red House in Douglas. You'll see it's classic in its arts and crafts interpretation of vernacular rural buildings from England. The deeply carved and painted barge boards, the brick chimney stack, the beautiful stained glass detailing. This is arts and crafts at its kind of finest and most romanticized ideal of a medieval building in the vernacular landscape. Also by Baillie Scott is Onchan Village Hall. It's a much cleaner and purer version of arts and crafts. Stripped back, it's almost slightly modern in its simplicity and its external appearance. Its steep pitched roof, simple building line, but with beautiful details such as the stained glass with its little heart embellishment motif. Baillie Scott wasn't working alone on the island in terms of arts and crafts houses. His contemporary was Armitage Rigby. Although also not a native, he set up practice on the island, and this is his designed house named Ruskinville, which is located in Little Switzerland. For me, it's a classic design focusing on that vernacular revival of English country houses from times gone past. The timber framing, the brick chimney stack, but with a very modern element. The rounded porch is modern and beautiful in its detail. This is another Armitage Rigby building, the British Hotel. And to me, it looks like a building that wouldn't be out of place in a Shropshire town. It has the close studied panelling detail that you see on many timber frame buildings from that region. And although to some extent, if you think about it, it seems like an alien concept to be placed on the Isle of Man, but somehow it works within the townscape setting and provides real distinctiveness to the area. As an island, there is a strong association with the sea, and we have many maritime buildings. This is a collection of lighthouses that were produced by the Stevenson's family. The earliest by Robert Stevenson in the early 19th century, and the latter by his grandsons in the early 20th century. It's not been possible to cover all of the building types here on the island, but I hope it gives a flavour of our built environment, how they contribute to the island's character and local distinctiveness. And thank you. And I'll pass you over to John Paul now.
Thanks very much, Ross. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so I'm going to, so Ross has kind of given us a sort of big island picture of some of the built heritage and the vernaculars here. I'm going to talk really about conservation-led regeneration with a focus on Castletown, so a little bit more kind of focused in. I'm even newer to the island than Ross. I've only been here for 8 months, so yeah, forgive me if I get any of my sort of background facts or names wrong. But really, I've been struck also by the natural beauty of the island, and also our wealth of built heritage. There's such a variety and wealth. I put this up as the cover image, really to start us thinking about, you know, what conservation means. You know, does conservation mean that absolutely everything needs preserving and keeping, you know, exactly as it is? And if so, do we end up with you know, towns like this where, you know, everything just gets stacked up and we end up with just a mishmash of, you know, loads and loads of old objects and buildings? I would say not, but that's really what my talk's kind of unpacking. So if I can get it to go on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm John Paul Walker. I'm as I already introduced, historic buildings architect for Manx National Heritage. We're the organisation which is responsible for the protection and promoting of the Isle of Man's natural, built and cultural heritage. My previous roles, I've been partnerships team leader for Historic England. I've been a partner in Walker Cunnington Architects, which is practice that specialises in conservation. I've been a lecturer at Sheffield, well, at several universities, but mostly Sheffield University in their School of Architecture. And I'm also a trustee of Regather Charity, a charity based in Sheffield focused on supporting local resilience, trade and employment. So what is constructive conservation? Well, heritage and development are often not thought of as comfortable partners. Heritage is often seen as the barrier. It is the thing, you know, it's like an obstacle. So often owners, developers, even the general public might see heritage when it comes to thinking about change as the obstacle, if you like, to be overcome. However, in many of the most popular and successful towns and cities, their historic environment is an integral part of this appeal, giving it a more unique sense of place and character. Now, we've already heard Ross talk about, you know, this kind of unique character, or sort of, you know, special sense of place, but that's something that I'll be kind of referring to as through my talk. The historic character is a result of years of adaptation to changing needs. So it's that moulding of changing to, you know, as needs change through time, the environment has changed in response to that. Change needs to be allowed to continue if the place is to thrive. So constructive conservation is a term now widely used to describe an adaptive approach to heritage, shifting away from preservation to seeing the historic environment as a positive catalyst for regeneration. This involves understanding and unlocking its unique historic character and realizing its potential to become more socially and economically vibrant. So again, it's this allowed, this kind of managed change. It's more unlocking than reinventing. So it's this idea that instead of, you know, just looking for the plain slate, as it were, we're always looking to sort of adapt and unlock what is already there, rather than just completely reinventing. In order to make the right decision between what should be preserved, adapted, or completely redeveloped, it is essential to first understand this character of place, this kind of special, unique character. This is formed by the layers created by this changing needs and the uses and the story of the people that use it. This unique sense of place can then be promoted and enhanced by the next layer of development. So once we understand that, we can build upon it, and it can become a positive thing for change. Here's just an example, this illustration here on the right. This is Bluecoats in Liverpool, originally an 18th century school, fell into disrepair and disuse. And as you can see from these illustrations, these photographs, it was redeveloped. Obviously, this front elevation with its which sort of surrounds the forecourt, they took an approach there to pretty much put it back as it was, even where they've had to put new insertions. So there's actually some remodeling at the front here for disabled access, but that's been done, to be as invisible as possible. Whereas if we go to the rear yard, it's a very different story, where here it's seen it as an opportunity to actually build upon and add the next layer. So you can see here a whole new range is being built and remodeled to really enliven and reanimate and reactivate this rear courtyard. So as I've already said, the Isle of Man has an incredibly rich variety of built heritage. We see pockets of conservation regeneration across the island, but I also see many missed opportunities. Taking Castletown as an example, and we're going to try and understand a little more about what this conservation regeneration means. So Castletown, here it is on the right, aerial photograph. It's the old capital, the Isle of Man, and therefore has a wealth of historic buildings, squares and narrow ad hoc streets. But this rich fabric had become disconnected and diluted over the years, leaving each part disjointed and under-realised. So just I'm going to keep on referring us to sort of photographs and plans of the town, but you can just to kind of help people have an orientating point. So this is the castle here, obviously, probably don't need to point that out to you, in the centre. This is the inner dock back here, behind it. And then to the front of it, this is the market square. So if you just kind of try and hold those in your mind as I go through other slides. Town centres are complex jigsaws of parts, both physically, socially and economically. So they're very, very difficult things to understand. They're a very complex organism, if you like. This means that regeneration is rarely down to one single project. It is instead multiple projects working together as pieces of a larger jigsaw. Successful regeneration then causes a ripple effect as individual projects, often public funded, show the potential of a place and therefore build confidence and attract further investment. Now, this is a sort of a process I'd like to demonstrate through the recent development of Castletown. These things take time. They certainly don't happen overnight. They can happen over, decades. We can see here how back in 1971, the sort of eminent architect and urban designer Gordon Cullen actually did a plan for Castletown. And some of those things were taken on board, other things weren't. So it's something which, it's a long process, and it's a continual process, and it involves multiple projects and multiple stakeholders. So it's never one person. It requires lots and lots of people sort of coming together, kind of sharing a vision. And master plans are that bigger picture, critical to ensuring different pieces of the jigsaw fit together to make sure that we're working towards a holistic goal. That overarching master plan wasn't always there for Castletown, so it's kind of interesting that, as I said, I don't know all the background, but I'd be interested to know more about how much of it was almost sort of serendipity and how much of it was actually, a planned vision. So over the past 10 years, Castletown's regeneration has built upon its historic streets and public spaces, realising their potential and knitting them back together. So what do I mean by that? Well, so here we have a plan. similar to that aerial photograph, the castle in the middle, Market Square to the bottom, the inner harbour here, the outer harbour here. Now, some of the focal points, really, the sort of assets, if you like, and the sort of historically where the town has grown from, are these focal points. So, you know, the castle, an obvious one, the Market Square. This was where trade happened. This is where people came from outside to bring goods, to share, to trade, but also to catch up on gossip and to spend a bit of time. Parliament Square here, with the old House of Keys addressing that. So the old Parliament actually addressing that small square there. Castle Street, sort of linking these spaces together. So, you know, the inner harbour through past Parliament Square through to Market Square, all wrapping round the castle, that kind of almost like consistent backdrop to the centre of Castletown. And there are a cumulative series of public projects which kick-started this regeneration, or how I see it anyway. So there was the Market Square first that happened, then Speaker's Garden, which is this small area just to the north of the Market Square. Then the Quartz Deck, which is this area up here, and then Parliament Square. Now I'm just going to talk about those a little bit more. So Market Square, that first one, the historic heart of the town, as I already said, and an early piece in this regeneration jigsaw. Really, the aim of this was to transform what was just a tarmac-topped, you know, car park with, you know, white lines marking out bays. Really not a very usable space. Occasionally it was closed to cars and used for other functions, but really there was no sense of place or of framing of, you know, the setting for these wonderful buildings that surrounded it. So Castletown commissioners commissioned a scheme using town and village regeneration funding to really rethink this space completely, to think of it as this sort of flexible outdoor space that could be used for all sorts of civic gatherings and just a place for people to gather, you know, on a Saturday afternoon sort of thing, Sunday afternoon, especially on a lovely sunny day, as we have in this photograph down at the bottom. And it was, in my mind, a very successful scheme. You know, it rationalised the parking. It kept a sense of openness and the civicness to this space. And most importantly, it drew on that language and the material and layout and language and the geometry of the historic town, the historic buildings that surrounded it. Investment in Castletown's historic townscape acted as a catalyst, building confidence for private business to invest and reinvest around the square, using this momentum to spread to other parts of the town centre. So, as you can see from this photograph, you know, at one time, these buildings surrounding it weren't looking as vibrant or as well kept as they do in this photograph. That happened really following, you know, as a kind of a knock-on effect of the scheme for the Market Square. So to move on to the next piece of the jigsaw, the Quartz Deck. So this really, it was a scheme. This was a building that was owned by Manx National Heritage, or purchased by Manx National Heritage, I believe, in order to safeguard a very important historic vista and to create a focal point that would connect the harbour, that inner harbour, to the town centre, leading people between the two and increasing footfall past the shops that are in between. So this is that historic vista up in the top right-hand side. You can't, I don't have an existing photograph, you know, a before photograph showing that view, but you can see here how the existing building that was this was converted in a joint enterprise between Manx National Heritage and Fancy Coffee to turn what was the Social Security Office into a new cafe. What you can't see on this photograph is to the right is a pretty dreary car park. Again, seemed to be Castletown's favourite thing, you know, tarmac with white lines on it. But this was, again, rethought, building on that language that had already been kind of established in the market square. So using some similar materials, building this new fantastic area, which was connecting, if I just go back. So really sort of reinforcing this connection, drawing people. So we've got a really successful place here now, Market Square. So the next step was to create this connection to this. This is the Quartz Deck with the cafe and with the backdrop of the inner harbour beyond. So starting to knit the city back together. There were other projects taken on. These are a couple of Manx National Heritage were involved in. So the Speaker's Garden, I pointed out, this is just directly off to the north of the Market Square. There's a re-landscaping. You can see here this photograph in the top right, re-landscaping with support from Friends of Manx National Heritage on that one to do a lovely wild sort of meadow. I'll probably be corrected because I believe it's not just a meadow mix, but that sort of idea really. So quite a naturalistic garden. Here to the left and lower right, we've got the courthouse, the courtroom in Castle Rushen. So this is actually in the castle, inside that tower that you see here. And this was to renovate this space, to create a new place for meetings and special events right in the heart of Castletown. Believe it or not, when we found this space, this just had a sort of a modern suspended office ceiling over it, completely concealing this lantern. So part of that scheme was to kind of rediscover, if you like, and re-uncover that wonderful lantern, which really makes this feel such a special and civic space. So, as people have realised the town's potential, as I've already said, really, slightly repeating myself here, there's this ripple effect, inward investment, new economic activity. It's now a vibrant place with a diverse offering, helping to attract a wide range of people to spend more time in the town, whether to live, work, or enjoy a bit of leisure time. You can see just a taster here of a few of the different kind of events that happen. Festivals, food events, all sorts of things. This is where people come to gather and to enjoy. But also, I mean, these are all the kind of big events. As I said, if you just go there on a Saturday afternoon and there's a little bit of sun out, it's a lovely place and there's lots of people just sitting out enjoying it. Nipping into, maybe the pub for a pint or for a drink, or nipping into the shop for an ice cream, but, the square being that focal place. So this is conservation regeneration. But as I said, it's not something that just ends. Regeneration is a continual process. So what next? So this is my last couple of slides. So really, this is the question that we at Manx National Heritage have been kind of asking ourselves, what are the next steps? Well, there's two that we have planned so far, and one that I'm just going to sort of throw in the ring, if you like. So we've got the police station. This is Ross already mentioned Bailey Scott. Well, we have one of Bailey Scott's buildings here, just a turn of the century police station, lovely little building. It had fallen into dilapidation and wasn't in use, so it was all kind of locked up. So we've entered into a joint venture with Marlin Spike and Manx National Heritage to turn this into a hub for Marlin Spike's local chain of hotels, bars and restaurants. But we're also ensuring that we still get public access to this wonderful piece of heritage. So there's going to be some of the rooms will be used as communal facilities managed by Castletown commissioners. So they can use it in a really imaginative way, sharing some of the facilities within the building. But we're not only just looking at the building, we're again looking at the wider townscape. So what we're planning to do is to demolish the 1980s extension to the back, to actually open up this secondary sort of back street route through between Parliament Street and the Quartz Deck, further knitting that town together. There's those who are in this conference from the Isle of Man will probably have heard that we've got plans for the Nautical Museum. You know, we'd really like to reimagine that. So this is it here, it's sort of dark red square to the top right. So it's our Nautical Museum, owned and run by Manx National Heritage. It's been our museum for many years. I don't know how many. But it needs a rethink. It's become tired, and also there's a very significant boat that was stored in the sort of one of the cellars in the building in very damp conditions. So we've taken that out, restored it, and we want to bring it back, but we want to really build around that. There's a sort of world-class attraction, a really fantastic museum that tells the nautical story of the Isle of Man, Castletown. And the story of this boat as well. But again, it's not just about the building. As I said, it's very much tucked away. So again, we're thinking about how maybe the extension, we need to extend and build an enclosure for this new boat, a controlled enclosure. So how that enclosure could actually give us this kind of greater visual connection, sort of signposting the museum from the Quartz Deck. So here again, in the bottom left-hand side, you see the Quartz Deck. With the museums just in these buildings here, so this is probably a little bit small on your screens, but this sort of glazed and copper structure sort of peeking up above here is where you'd get a sneak peek of this boat. So that's one that we have on the cards. There's other ones that we would love to do. No plans on the cards at the moment, but they're kind of on our radar. So down here in the bottom, there's another square down here, which is the old grammar school. Another not hugely visited heritage attraction. It is again owned and run by Manx National Heritage, but it's a little bit out on a limb. As you can see, it's surrounded by more tarmac, more white lines. Which really kind of cuts it off from all this activity here. So again, I've just kind of, this isn't a plan. This is me just kind of saying, hey, how about if this connected to the town, to the outer harbour, views of the sea. I mean, really, potentially, it's a fantastic location. It could be the hub, if you like, where visitors come here, and from this point, they get this wow view of the sea and the harbour, and then they're kind of directed to other parts of Castletown to go and see the other attractions and things. So maybe that's another one for a future date. But that's me finished. So thanks very much, and I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to Martin.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, John Paul. Thank you, Ross, and thank you to the three biospheres for organising these sessions and for inviting us to take part in this one. I'm going to give you a very brief background about me, and then I've got some projects to run through quite quickly to show you one or two of the points that we sort of feel are important in this. Hold on a second. What is important is getting the slides going. Okay. So, my name is Martin Thomas, and I'm a chartered architect and a director of and co-founder with Karen Horncastle of Horncastle Thomas. I grew up in the island, actually, and I moved back over here in 2010 after living in Liverpool for some years. We're a small practice and set up 11 years ago now. And being architects in a small place like this, we have to be generalists first and foremost. We're not specialist conservation architects, but we do try to pay close attention to the character and detail of whatever we're working on. And I think it's that's resulted in us working on some of the really interesting projects in registered buildings and conservation area settings, a few of which I'm going to talk about. So I went to the Liverpool School of Architecture, and the first design brief we were given suggested that architects will increasingly work on existing buildings. And they taught really the importance of research and understanding and then developing this knowledge as a context for the architectural project. And then our work, kind of as architects, would add to that. And we would really need to understand and have an understanding of the effect that we were having on the building. So I think this point really continues to underpin our approach and our work, really. So in the projects we'll show today, we'll try and focus on one or two elements that have defined the work for us, and then also situate that within the scope of the webinar. I'm going to start by overlapping on John Paul's territory and talking about a couple of projects that we've been working on in Castletown. So here is the Isle of Man. It looks like most of you are from here, so you might have seen that already. And then Castletown is down here in the southeast of the island. It's a small inner harbour, and it's dominated really by the amazing castle. It was the former capital of the island and the seat of government. So the first project we're going to look at is some of the work we have done at Castle Rushen. Not the project that John Paul has just shown you for the courtroom, but rather some work that, well, it's one of the best medieval castles in Europe. It's a scheduled ancient monument, and it forms a backdrop, as John Paul has said, to the town that's grown up around it. It's also a visitor attraction, and this project is about bringing certain aspects of those facilities up to date, particularly to improve visitor access into the heart of the ground level of the castle, and also, so that's kind of in this area, and then also to improve the entrance and ticket area. It's quite a modest project, but I think it is quite telling in some ways. So here's how the entrance looked before we started. You come in through the outer gatehouse. There's a cutout guards telling you where to get your tickets from, off in the room on the right, and a little barrier stopping you going through into the castle itself. The drawbridge, or the bridge over the drawbridge pit, as we found it, and then we needed to find access, level access to these rooms, all at kind of different levels from each other. So our work really had to be lower than low key. It'd have to completely sit in the background. Would have to be, in our view, modern, not pastiche medieval. But the objects would have to have really appeared to be settled into their setting, and as if they'd been there for a while. And the materials really are simple and robust. They carry through into the keep: oak handrails, galvanized railings, weathered rusty steel structure, and grippy hardwood decking boards. And we think the materials fit well with the sort of tone of the castle, and the simplicity of the design complements rather than conflicts with its kind of more massive structure. So we're trying to make the new things look new without distracting from the building, giving them a kind of both an air of permanence, but then also recognizing that they ought to be able to be removed really without trace. So the second project, one that John Paul has talked about already, next building, a registered building, and within the Castletown Conservation Area. It's the Castletown Costa, and it's had all sorts of uses in the past, but most recently it was the Social Security Office, and also a store for the police station over the road. And you can see that it sits well between the castle and the inner harbour. And as John Paul mentioned, really, Castle Rushen, the conservation plan for the castle had identified this as an important view, and so this building's role in that important view of the castle across the harbour. So efforts were being made to find a use for it to protect its future. And when we were approached to help, Manx National Heritage were in negotiations with the Costa franchise holder as a potential tenant and to provide the sustainable use to secure its future. You can see from the plan that originally it was two buildings actually. It had a dividing wall and then dividing walls into this outrigger at the back. There was a lean-to against the pub next door, and then a yard and harbour wall that overlooked the harbour. Our approach was pretty straightforward, but it was just to remove the subdividing walls, form one space for the cafe seating, and then put all of the back of house stuff at the back of house, the counter, store and office, and then the toilets, things like that. So we built over this yard in order to fit these things in. And that also allowed us to extend the cafe area into that space, so that you had a small space with this long window on top of the harbour wall, and you could have your coffee overlooking the harbour. To get to this point, we did quite a lot of internal alterations, but this was balanced really against the benefits of providing a kind of new and quite desirable lettable space. This has been fitted out by Costa, and it would protect the building's future and those more significant views of the castle. And finally, that great bonus that John Paul has talked about as well, that the design of a public open space where previously there was a car park. So we used the same materials here as on the ground as were being used at the Castletown Square regeneration to make that connection. And then plus some simple heavy duty concrete benches and weathered steel planters to form an outside seating area. So the open space really gives something positive back to the harbour, and as well as protecting the view to the castle, the project overall has made I think a great contribution to the public open space in the town. Okay, the next projects, we're still in Castletown. Not a registered building, but within the Castletown Conservation area. It's quite a small terraced house, so we've added a couple of modern spaces as well as refurbishing the main part of the house, kind of top to bottom. And this had to deal with damp problems in the solid limestone walls. These were addressed by removing the modern materials and relining the building with traditional and more natural materials to upgrade the walls. So this project really is about updating an older house kind of spatially and technically for modern use, again securing its future through improved suitability. So the outrigger was removed and replaced with a living dining kitchen space, that modern living kind of, etc., and that opened straight out into the garden. And above, we've got a new bathroom that opened off the half landing of the staircase above a utility room, then a kitchen with a sort of big roof light over the kitchen. We've taken care again with the materials, and it's just low key and simple, you know, white rendered walls, zinc roofs, and the kind of palette fits nicely with the local limestone, slate, and the render on the neighbouring properties as well. And the materials, I think, show that the parts are new, and they don't have to resort to kind of mimicking something old. So here you see the front elevation repointed with lime render, new slimline double glazed windows on the front in these kind of beautiful frames that pretty closely replicate the originals. Here's the refurbished interior, and the stairs, which is kind of where the influence of the new parts start to be noticed. This leads through the main space into the through to the main space opening onto the garden, and then you can see at the other end of the garden this kind of little home office room as well, again with the zinc roof detail. So as well as the front and rear walls being repointed, removing cement and using lime mortar, you can see that the gable wall has been rendered. A lime render was used for this so that the wall can breathe rather than trapping moisture and causing damp problems. But these houses were originally rendered with cement, as with a lot of buildings from this period onwards on the island. And it does tend to cause problems with damp where moisture can't escape. So the walls have been lined and insulated internally with wood fiberboard. And quite often you'll find that a traditional solid wall houses have been lined with a standard modern insulation board. And this approach can cause problems, again, due to a lack of breathability. So the materials we've used here would significantly reduce the risk of the damp problems returning in the house, and again, ensure that the walls are breathable. The choice of these materials is important, and there are a great many similar houses of this sort on the island, and these, need to be upgraded correctly. And I've got to say, I mean, this is a learning curve for us and for others, and it's been brought into sharp focus really in relation to the island's aspirations to reach net zero carbon. There are issues working against this at the moment, though. I think there's a general lack of real understanding, and that's building owners, building contractors and consultants, and we're learning all the time about this. There's a total lack of established supply chain to the island with these sorts of materials. And the cost of doing these kind of works is much higher than using the low cost typical materials that you'll get off the shelf. And that's a really, really important factor. And we will come back to that later on. Anyway, on to Douglas. There we are, in case you don't know. We have two projects to look at here. The first one is the Castle Mona on Douglas Promenade. A very significant building for the island and appeared in Ross's slides earlier on. It's a registered building, and it is in the Promenade's conservation area. Built as the residence on the island for the 4th Duke of Atholl in the early 1800s, it was converted to a hotel in 1831, and that sort of has started a chain of redevelopment, extension, alteration. It's been left unused since 2007 and recently purchased by a local company, and we helped with a series of planning applications and registered building applications for works aimed at protecting the building from decaying any further. So these drawings were submitted for supporting information for those applications, and we've included them today really as an application of, as an example of our developing an understanding of the story and development of a building, as part of our work. So we have drawings sourced from the Manx Museum Library and also the Public Records Office, and they help us piece a lot of the story together. And then photographs from the Eye Museum help massively. These photographs that, this one that puts it in context of pre-prom development, sat in its own estate before that was sold off into lots and developed as boarding houses. So this kind of research and timeline and so on results in putting that into a drawing that we can understand, and hopefully kind of conveys the way the building's developed. So it's a very simple color-coded drawing. The first part is red, and it goes through the various kind of, albeit simplified stages, to the sort of bluey color, which is the 1990s bowling alley. And we can take that information. I should say these photographs also chart that development of that side of the building. So we're using the drawn evidence, but also whatever photographs we can get hold of. And we can take that information on and redraw it in terms of conclusions we come to about the building's significance. And these are, it's kind of assessed against standard criteria that rank it from very high significance down to intrusive. And so we sort of stated that the central core of the building, which is kind of the image of the building, and that the main presence on the promenade is the high significance. Again, going down all the way to the intrusive part of the bowling alley. And so piecing together this story, right, I think it helps us understand that alterations can be made to these sorts of buildings, and that really the future changes are just the next step in the development. So gaining a good understanding can really help us make those right decisions too. And again, I think that just goes back to the first thing I said about when I was studying. So there's the resonance and the relevance of that. Okay, the next project is in Douglas and is the Douglas Market Hall. So this is about reusing a registered building that had been neglected over a number of years. And we've included it really as a successful commercially funded regeneration project. they've invested in a great building that was really on its uppers. And it's made a real positive impact on the surrounding area and also on the businesses that now occupy it. There you go. There it is. This is, again, where we started from. It had been sold by Douglas Borough Council into private ownership in 2016. And then we worked on this project with the designers Brinkworth, who have an amazing track record in retail design and interiors and product design and architecture. You can see the problems from this previous market stall fit out. You get a sense of the volume and the details of the space, but the windows are completely obscured. And it seems very inward looking, and it's not connected with its surroundings, and particularly the quayside. And the building was massively improved just by stripping these things out. And the new parts would be clearly new. They have their own language in terms of form and materials and organisation, and they give the original parts of the building space to be seen and a backdrop to be understood against. The image of the building, so the roof is a very strong part of it. The roof lanterns, the ironwork, and the windows, and all sort of restored. And the new parts really help sort of show it off. The windows now are clear glass, replacing the obscured glazing, and that connection is made really strongly back to the quayside. And the mix of uses works really well together. And it also works well to help reinforce the kind of the developing identity of the harbour side. There we go. Okay, I'm going to finish with two projects in a rural setting. Okay, so they're on the west of the island. There they are with the green dots. The first one is Raby House. And this one, it's on the outside of a village called Glenmay in the west. And it continues the idea really that a modern part of a building can be part of the story, I think. And in this case, can help unlock a plan that didn't work very well. So there are three parts of the building we started with. This part is the original cottage, that's the sort of farm cottage. There's this fantastic but more imposing Victorian section that faces the road. And then on the back between the two pieces is this kind of more ad hoc infill. And the two main parts just aren't really linked very well together, and they don't work so well together. So the proposal is to remove the third section and replace it with a new modern part that, first of all, better links the two old sections of the building together, the original parts, and then, but also starts to link the building better and connect it better to the amazing landscape that's around it. So the modern part, it's clearly a modern addition, and it just represents the latest part of the building's development. It's kind of part of the story. So works are ongoing. These aren't massively recent photographs, but you can see the Victorian part and the cottage part have been nicely restored externally. And then there's a construction site to the rear. Okay, so the last one, I'll just talk about this very briefly, is in a very rural exposed setting. And is currently without roof. A Fulton, bringing back these derelict buildings, renovating them, and then connecting them together to form a new family home. We are at a really early stage on this project, but the new owners are very enthusiastic and really interested and excited about using traditional and appropriate materials. And you can see they've put a massive amount of effort into raking out and repointing the barn. So those last kind of projects in particular put me in mind of the AJ Architects Journal Retrofirst campaign, which I just have to mention. So this was launched to lobby the UK government on VAT policy and procurement to encourage the use of to encourage the reuse of old buildings rather than demolishing and building new. Now, their VAT, suggestion is to cut VAT on refurbishment, repair and maintenance from 20 to 5%. Well, we're a little step ahead on the Isle of Man in that we already have a 5% rate on domestic property. But we would love to see that extended to commercial buildings, first of all, particularly in the context of the net zero aims of the island, because this could make a massive contribution. And in the absence of available sources of serious grant funding for the historic building sector, how about reducing work on registered buildings and buildings in conservation areas below 5%? So that would be an instant 5 or 20% grant if it went down to 0. And it would massively help shift the perception on the island that owning a registered building is a millstone rather than a benefit. And that's where I will end. So I'll hand back to Joe. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks very much to all our speakers for what was a really educational and informative kind of whistle-stop tour through the past, present and future of our built heritage there. I certainly learned an awful lot. I'm sure a lot of you who are watching from off the island are feeling a bit homesick right now as well, some of those fantastic views. I thought it occurred to me actually that I ought to insert a bit of a plug right now for Manx National Heritage's Heritage Open Days, which take place later in the year, which are a fantastic opportunity to look behind the scenes to buildings you don't normally get to look behind. So keep a lookout for those. We'll now put the questions to our panelists. We've got a good scotch of questions. So Dean, I think you're going to take the first one.
Oh yeah, thanks very much. Look, I want to say a couple of things as well. Look, all these presentations have been fascinating, and you know, architecture is very subjective. You know, it's what's right for one person might not be right for another. I mean, my personal favourite was the school that Ross showed in Liverpool, which had been restored to original, because then you're stepping back in time and history, which is really, really fascinating. But you know, Martin and John were looking at other angles. You know, how you develop over time, you know, change your fashion and the like. There's plenty of buildings I know that have completely different styles throughout the ages, which is, you know, which is interesting in itself. So on that note, I mean, I've got a question here from Chris Callow, and it shows the passion for, you know, our heritage. And Chris highlights a building, the Stevenson Lighthouse there on the Calf Man, that's, you know, in need of a bit of TLC. And, you know, is that a building that, you know, would be something that could be considered a building for regeneration? I think probably best person to answer that is John Paul, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a fantastic building. I've had the good fortune to be out there and have a look at it, even though I've only been here for a short while. So there's a short boat journey across the Sound. Yeah, fantastic building. Obviously, it is very vulnerable, both because of the fact that it's, you know, it's not used, and also its location. So it would be fantastic to get it back into some sort of use. You know, obviously buildings are most at risk when they don't have a function. You know, that's when they're most at risk. They're at risk from dilapidation because there's no one there to spot the leaks and all the rest of it. And they're also, you know, at risk from even vandalism, you know. So you know, there's plenty of, for example, where I worked previously in West Yorkshire, there was a lot of mills lost. You know, literally, there was mills lost every month. You know, huge buildings through to arson. So yeah, it is a great concern. So I think you're right. The buildings are crying out for a use. Obviously, I mean, they are they're owned by Manx National Heritage, so they're part of our estate. So that responsibility, I guess, falls to us. Obviously, the problem we have is that our funding doesn't allow us to develop all of our sites. So it's really looking at it, you know, as a bigger picture. Obviously, we have to sort of prioritize different buildings, but certainly, you know, I mean, I kind of, you know, sort of threw in the ring, if you like, a few buildings that I'd love to see something happen to in Castletown. you could certainly add the lighthouses to that list.
Fantastic. Thank you, John Paul.
I'm going to
It all
jump
comes
in.
down to, yeah, it comes down to
Sorry.
money, doesn't it, really? You can't do everything, and you have to prioritise, but that's a difficult one. It's a very difficult one. Okay, sorry there, Eleanor, apologies.
No, no worries. No, it's just, it's a really interesting discussion to have, I think, because like you say, resources are always, I think, the issue with these kind of restoration projects, and particularly when you're looking at using the traditional methods and traditional materials, that can definitely add to the complications, I'd imagine, for sure. Something that Dean touched on and that Joe mentioned at the start in the introduction is the stories that buildings could tell, really, when you see them, as Martin described, with several different sections that were built at different times. I think that's a really fascinating aspect of the architecture that you see everywhere, really. There's one question that kind of touches on that comes in from Ian Radcliffe. I'm not sure who's best to answer it, so jump in, anyone who wants to. Is the cat slide roof a feature of a particular period, example part of the original design, or are they likely to have featured at any time when dwellings were extended? Does anyone want to take that one? Ross, you've put your hand up there, jump in.
Yeah, I'll take that one. The cat slide roofs are usually seen as later additions to the main building. So if you had like a 3-bay farmhouse which had 2 rooms, when they would then extend it, they would go out the back and add an extension onto the rear and continue the roof down in the cat slide. Obviously, in some buildings they're built at the same time and it's part of the integral design, but usually here on Ireland that's an indication of a later addition. In terms of date, really anything from the kind of 19th century onwards they appear. I haven't seen any earlier than that. That's not to say there aren't, but I would use it as an indication it's a later extension to an earlier building.
Thanks, Ross.
Perfect, thank you, Ross. I've got a question here from Marlene Masker, MLC. It's actually a member of our Island Parliament, the Tim Ward, and very passionate about our built heritage. And Marlene asks, and it's possibly for all of you, what 1 or 2 things would really encourage conservation, repurposing and regeneration of our built heritage? It's a very broad question, that. So would you like to go first with that, Martin, or?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, Marlene. It's a difficult question to answer, I think. We held a year's worth of events a number of years ago under the Isle of Architecture banner, which was put together in conjunction with Culture Van and Manx National Heritage and organised by Revel Events. And the final kind of event of that was a symposium, a sort of day-long event, which invited a number of architects over from England and a chap from the Churches Conservation Trust. They all presented their projects with a massive amount of enthusiasm, and it was a great day. But almost every project they talked about was funded by heritage lottery funding, and grant funding, and it's just something that simply isn't available on the island at the moment. And whether there are ways of attracting the heritage funding from the UK lottery, or extending grant funding in some way, I fear not. And I think actually the cost is the issue. Particularly in relation to upgrading of these buildings. In order to do them in the correct manner, the labour costs and the materials costs are relatively significantly more than to do them in the wrong manner. So I think that's the thing. The other thing, as I think has come out from a few of the projects that John Paul has talked about and we've talked about, is that kind of idea of partnering. And if that's if you can find a use for a building, we haven't kind of quite got the critical mass of population here for enough people to see a building that they fear is threatened, and enough people to get together to start a community trust to help save it. We simply don't have enough enough of a population, I think. Although that said, the exception that proves me wrong there is Queen's Pier, obviously, which has been done on that kind of basis. So there needs to be a real kind of enthusiasm and passion, but then I do think cost is the massive issue. And then I saw another question about training and things like that, and I think there are things going on where perhaps the UCM will become involved in more kind of wider traditional methods of building for their apprenticeship programs. I don't know. There are things going on that perhaps will improve those things.
I've got a question here from Jacob Sullivan. Now he's making a statement first, identifying the real benefits of the upgrades to Castletown Square, and bringing them back to their original purpose and getting people using them and enjoying them, which is great. And he highlights the move away from car reliance. And is that something that maybe is happening a bit more, and is that being incorporated into design? And is that what the public want? I'm kind of getting the general gist of that rather large question there.
I'm happy to answer this one. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's, we have this problem that cars take up a huge amount of space, don't they? And of course, everyone wants to be able to park, near to where they want to go. That's quite understandable. That's why we get in the car, is so that we can drive to, the shop, or to our friends, or to the school, or to our office. So we're all guilty of wanting to get to where we want to go in our vehicles. But obviously, there's, I think for decades now, it's been realised that influx of cars, that volume, that area that they need, it has a very negative effect on any townscape, cityscape. So how we manage that, I think we all need to. It's always going to be a compromise. It's always going to be something where we have to, as a public community, if you like, we have to sort of decide, whether we want to have our, market squares like we have Castletown, or whether we want our market squares to be car parks. I mean, the Castletown commissioners took on that project, but really, it needed the public to get behind that. And I mean, some parking was retained in that market square. So it's partly about how to creatively do it. But obviously there's also infrastructure measures that can be undertaken. So, I mean, Isle of Man doesn't really have such huge town centres, apart from Douglas, really, that warrant, a sort of park and ride sort of scenario. But obviously there are schemes like that, by improving public transport into city centres from particular nodes. But obviously there's also the push of, the carbon crisis, which is, I think, given us all another reason to start to wake up. So it's maybe, it was a bit of a luxury to have a nice town square, and maybe we were happy to have the car park. But now the kind of whole carbon neutral crisis, the carbon crisis, that gives us another reason really to be reassessing how we're using our cars.
Thanks, John Paul.
I think we've probably got time just for one more question, because we're coming up rapidly to 2:30. And sorry to those of you whose questions we didn't get to. We'll maybe try and find a way of kind of responding to you or something. But just a quick whiz round at the end, just a bit of sort of fun way to end. What is your favourite building in the Isle of Man, and why? And if you can keep the answer reasonably short so we can get wrapped up by 2:30, that'd be great. Thank you. Shall I start with you, Ross?
Oh yeah, I'm really under pressure now. What's my favourite building? I've just got so many, it's hard to choose. I think it would depend on which day you asked me and what I was working on. The Castle Mona is a beautiful building. Martin touched on the work that's happening to restore it. I think it's of great significance. I love that. Kentraw is a building which is also, architecturally very good. But I also love the the simple plain vernacular buildings, they tell the stories of everyday people, and for me there's such value in that. That's how my ancestors lived, and you know, that's how everyday people lived. And yeah, so yeah, I can't choose one, but
thank you. Martin?
I think it's easy to pick your least favourite, and that's probably the one you're working on at the moment in a lot of ways. My kind of go-to answer for that is usually the Nook at the Quarter Bridge, just because it's still an unrivaled statement of modernism on the island, and it's nearly 100 years old, I think. So that's my one-liner answer.
I think for me, likewise, hard to choose one. I mean, I feel slightly, you know, I might be missing out on some gems because I haven't explored the whole island yet. So maybe I'll choose some slightly more obvious ones. One that's probably less controversial. If I can choose two, one that's less controversial, one that is controversial. One that's less controversial, hopefully, is not really a building particularly or officially, but it's the Laxey Wheel. I've got the sort of the real privilege to be working on it at the moment, and it's a fantastic, you know, piece. It's a massive machine. It's just absolutely fantastic. The largest working water wheel in the world, I think I'm correct in saying. The second one, slightly more controversial, but it's because it's the building that first welcomed me to the Isle of Man, would be the ferry terminal building. You know, it's a 90, I believe, 1960s, is it? Late 60s. And has been kind of chopped and changed, so has lost some of its clarity, but I think it's a lovely sort of piece of sort of vision of welcoming people to with that spire, welcoming people to the island when they come by boat, not by plane. They're my ones.
Fantastic, thanks very much. I think there used to be a magnificent restaurant at the top of that sea terminal building as well, so any older ones here. Sadly, it's now time to end this webinar, and also very sadly this whole series, which has run for the last 12 months. So I'd like to thank today's speakers, brilliant information, thank you, all the speakers who've contributed over the series. But my biggest thanks really go to Dean and Eleanor in Dublin and Kerry respectively, who came up with the idea for this series to mark the 50th of the UNESCO programme. It's been a real privilege to form a sort of closer friendship with two of our neighbouring biospheres and to all learn from each other. And special thanks to Eleanor, who has hosted all the webinars and dealt with any technical gremlins, including me nearly falling off the cliff, with a quiet aplomb, and kept us all sort of calm and and made sure that they've all worked brilliantly. She'll be busy editing this webinar, so for those of you who had to leave or whatever, or want to recommend it to colleagues, it'll be online soon, and we'll share it on our socials as well. So for now, just want to say thanks very much to everybody for your input today and across the whole series, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for sharing, Joe and Eleanor, for sharing your biospheres with us. The more I've learned about them, the more I want to visit, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity, hopefully in the not too distant future. So thank you again as our host today, Joe, and thanks, Eleanor, for hosting all the webinars throughout this series. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd like to just echo that really quickly. I suppose when we started this webinar series just over a year ago, I was not long in the role working for the Kerry Biosphere. So it was really inspiring to be able to learn from both Joe and Dean and their experience working in the Biosphere Reserves, and to link with their own Biosphere Reserves and start to learn more about how they operate in different circumstances in different areas. And really just expand our knowledge and to share a lot as well, which has been fantastic. So as Dean said, I'm very much looking forward to visiting both locations once we're able to again. And thanks very much to the speakers today. This has definitely been probably one of my favorite webinars as well. Really informative and really interesting. So thanks so much for sharing your knowledge.
And I think finally, when you do come over, we'll all have to have a coffee at the Costa in Castletown that's been much mentioned today. Thanks, everybody. Take care.